especially white people, don't think there's anything wrong. They think, oh, Obama got in, he was president, and everything has changed. No, everything has gotten worse. And so it's not about where I come from, it's who I am. I will always be black. But am I treated fairly? Am I looked at as a person?
In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
That seems to be around the country, the de facto segregation. The in our area is objecting to the location of a new Northwest High School.
The voice of justice speaks again. It proclaims that fair housing for all human beings who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life.
One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
And we will make America great again. God bless you and good night. I love you.
Value. The value of things and the value of people. In America today, this value may be the thing that decides just how far you go in life. Across the nation, from the waters of the Chesapeake Bay to the wheat fields of Kansas, in every neighborhood, the land that Americans live on may decide not only the value of their homes, but the value of their futures.
Part of the challenge that you're dealing with when you're thinking about the African American experience in the United States, we start out as 3/5 of a person in the very beginning. And there's a war and several pieces of legislation that have to move forward in order for the 3/5 of a person piece to be challenged in a de facto sense. But in a de jure sense, not only just in the South, but also even in the North, you see situations where informal segregation is leveraged to control Black populations in particular.
So the use of real estate covenants was a common practice in Muncie for most of its development, most of the 20th century. As the city started to grow, really after about 1900, it started to grow to the north and west, north of the White River. And the developments that were started there, almost all of them included covenants with the real estate contracts that you signed that said that the property could not be sold to a black person, couldn't be sold to other minority groups, Asians, Jews, and these restrictions remained in place in most of these developments through the 1950s at least, and in some cases they lingered on into the 1970s, 80s, late into the 20th century.
And a lot of people still don't know that there are covenants that they have legally signed to own a home in Muncie that specifically say no coloreds, no Jews are allowed in these neighborhoods. So we still have Austin Heights, just different parts of Muncie neighborhoods that still have that racist language in their covenants. So when you sign a deed saying, I own this home, you're signing a legal document with that type of language in it.
It's pervasive in a lot of the areas and we've found that some of these here covenants still do exist where blacks are really not allowed to live there in the covenant of those areas where they have those established. So it's sort of unfortunate, that you still see that. But it's just one of those things that just haven't really been addressed. We just sort of skip over it and think, well, now you can go where you want to, but not really,
Because you can't always get loans to go somewhere else. You may have the money, but getting money from the bank to go into these areas, there's a system set up to keep people where they are.
Well, when you first go in to get your education to be a realtor, one of the things that they talk about is redlining and steering, which is through law and through practice has kind of been phased out, but you're going to notice that the effects of those things still linger today. So Muncie, as much as you may not want to believe it, is still relatively segregated. Maybe not through law, but through practice.
Yeah, so de jure is based on the law. But then de facto is essentially what's happening in real life. So when you look at African American history, what happens is you get a point right after Reconstruction where there's a civil rights law, there are, development of businesses, you see African Americans moving into the political process. Because they've ended, essentially segregation or apartheid. But then what ends up happening is the emergence of black codes. And with the black codes, you get what essentially ends up being the nadir of the black community, where voting is no longer protected. You see, instead of black people being able to move freely within the country, they get, relegated to certain sides of town, and then really controlled. And so that really becomes the reality, that even though you have these laws on the books, regardless of the laws, the reality that black people face based on just really white supremacy, it becomes a tough existence.
You see the legacies of that in neighborhoods such as Westwood right here off the edge of campus, or up on the north side of town, which is a middle-class neighborhood. These are places where they were initially limited to whites, or by practice at least, only marketed to whites. And while they're integrated to a degree now, they remain overwhelmingly white still. The covenants lingered in large part because they slipped through the cracks. It's one thing to pass a law and say you can't have a covenant that restricts who you can or cannot sell a piece of property to, but those documents weren't scrubbed. There wasn't somebody who was assigned to go through all the records and remove them, so they remained in place. And they typically weren't enforced in any formal way, and they couldn't be enforced once laws were passed against them. But that didn't mean that neighborhoods that had long been for whites only didn't stay that way, by custom if not by law.
Segregation defined by of the law and of the culture. So where does that bring us? Specifically, to one word.
Redlining is more about the banks. So let's say a bank, let's say Morningside, for an example, is a neighborhood in Muncie. It used to be once upon a time that a bank could just simply say no to Morningside. You know, it's a $30,000 house, it's a high crime rate, it's, 70%, whatever race, insert race A. We're not going to lend to anyone who wants to buy a house in that area. Well, that's going to shut a lot of people off. I mean, let's face it, if you're shopping for a $30,000 or $40,000 house, you don't have cash to buy a house, which means that neighborhood is just going to deplete.
Muncie is divided by the neighborhoods that have, I want to say, property value, worth.
Some people will say no. I say absolutely. And not a division of a clear, definitive line, but definitely people of color feel that there is that divide. We often feel like our opportunities, again, are less. But if you look holistically at our community, you ask a broad spectrum of people, they would say no, that we work together harmoniously and things are well in Muncie. But the undercurrent is that they are not.
And just like in just about every other city in the country, if you look at these maps, they were drawn in accordance with the existing real estate practices in the place. They consulted local realtors to figure out how to draw the lines around these maps. And if you look at the black neighborhoods, Industry and Whiteley, they were classified at the lowest level and were seen as the least attractive investment opportunities or the least desirable real estate. And so it was much harder, really impossible, to get federally supported loans to purchase houses in those neighborhoods. So this contributes to the inability of black people to create wealth in the same way that the covenants that we've talked about did.
And because they are a credit risk, they don't have the ability to get loans for new housing. Their home values, decrease over time because you have to keep up your home in order to maintain the value. If you don't get significant turnover on property in that particular community, then it's hard to really get new assessments and higher assessments. And so you begin to see quickly how by putting folks on a map and redlining them, you can quickly devalue them.
For the black community, you can say Whiteley and Crosstown. The north side of town versus the south side of town.
What makes a town? What brings it together? And what divides it? For Muncie, America's Middletown, it's no outlier. From the east to the west, city to town, and the neighborhoods in between, this de facto segregation has divided us. In the 1960s, Muncie Community Schools sought to build a third high school. Positioned on the northwest side of town, it would be located near mostly white, affluent neighborhoods. The NAACP called it an attempt to further segregate the city. On January 3rd, 1969, the frozen ground was broken at the corners of Bethel and Oakwood Avenues. A year later, Northside High would open its doors.
With all of the issues that they have in these schools, makes it even more complex. And the children at Morrison Ma, most of them had two-parent families. They had business people, they had culture, they had all the kinds of things that our children lacked. And so it made it very difficult. It still does today. The children who are in inner city schools struggle because they come to school unprepared. They don't read at home. That's not important in their homes. You know, it's important to just feed them and things like that. But reading is not important. And so when they go to school, they're behind. And most of them never catch up.
It's all part of the separate but definitely not
yes,
equal.
Right, separate but not equal.
Today, Muncie only has one high school. Southside and Northside now serve as middle schools. But the secret still lies in the numbers. Each residential property is valued, and that value taxed. It's this tax revenue that funds the institutions that surround our communities.
When you're thinking about property taxes, what happens is you look at the value of the home and there's an assessment. While your assessment is limited, what really matters or where the money comes in is on the what's perceived as the value of the property. So if Black homes are undervalued, if they're appraised at lower amounts because of just being in a predominantly Black community, you generally are going to find that you're going to get lower property taxes collected as an aggregate amount. Lower property taxes means less money going to a variety of different services, including schools.
It's basically, if you think about it now, it's a basic taxes, right? The more people that live in one area, the more tax income there is, the more resources that are available. I think that if you were to kind of take the programs out of the equation and just make everything flat, okay, you get so much money based on, for these specific programs, but all of those programs are available everywhere throughout the county, city, state. That would make more sense than saying, okay, this school has a football program and a science program, while this one has an art program and a science program and an athletes and a stadium and everything, while this one is struggling to survive.
I think there is a pretty big issue on the access to the quality of education that African American students do have, and I see it in some of my classes, or even how our counselors make schedules. A lot of it moved over from what school you went to. Like I said, Northside, Southside, a lot of the Southside kids weren't put in a lot of the AP dual credit classes unless they took it in the middle school itself. And there's a larger majority of Northside, middle upper class kids that went to Northside. They're mainly in the honors dual credit AP classes. And the AP and dual credit classes that I'm in, I could be the only Black student in there or the only 2 African American students in there. And it's made up of mostly Caucasian kids.
What I see now is the public education, that people are not, it's not important. Now, many of the children who are given choice, pro-choice or choice, can go anywhere they want to. But there's another segregation effort because the children in low income, they have no transportation. They don't have parents who can get them to wherever. And so, there's the same old problem.
It goes from, like I said, not just building a house or property, but the value of people and lives in said communities as well. one of the things that's interesting to me is like last week we were doing some school tours, and one of the schools is so overpopulated because people love it and they want to have their kids there. And then another school in the Whiteley community has a lot of space. I mean, a lot of kids are virtual, but there's still all these spaces where kids could actually be present. And so some of our school members, we were talking like, if this school is overcrowded, it looks like we need to like look at, lines, property lines and look at maybe, couldn't we move some of these kids to another school? Well, that would cause havoc. I don't want my kids to leave this school and go to that school. I'd rather them be overcrowded and not be able to socially distance properly in this school, because I'd rather them be on this northwest side of town versus being over there. And so you still see, race playing out in some undertones that most people would not just think it does, but it's still there. It's still there. From one school to the other, you can see some schools are much better kept up. Like if we were in Westview School, it's the dual language school, much better facilities than, a Longfellow, which is in Whiteley. You know what I mean? You can tell the culture of a school the minute that you walk in there.
Each one of those kids, each one of those students has a value amount when they go to a school. I mean, we have people here in Muncie that live in North Muncie, Northwest Muncie, that have never been in Whiteley. Never been in the Whiteley area, and will tell you they're not going to.
We're living in really multiple Americas. You have not only the urban, suburban, and rural divides, which break along ideological lines, but even when you're thinking about economic realities that people of color face.
We think that we're post-racial because we elected a black president, and it's not true. And when a lot of white people think that, and they think that race doesn't play a role, and then it's not embedded institutionally in our system, in our founding, you're living in denial and you're ignorant.
I think that there really are people that don't see it. I really think that there are people that don't understand it. I really believe that there are people that want to understand but haven't had the experience to be able to figure it out. And so it has to be in their face long enough for them to understand it.
Change starts right with us. So just some honesty, some transparency, some uncomfortable moments. The numbers don't lie, data doesn't lie. So let's look at this, with some deep lenses and figure out what we can do to kind of shift some of that.
We have to take control of our future now before it gets any worse. I want to see more policies and like in writing, like this is where we stand and this is how we're going to go forward on changing in Muncie how we do things.
People are trying to say, look at us, make sure that you see us and that you care about us too. And it's not going to happen overnight, and we can see that it's not happening overnight, but it's going to be important for us to continue to push that envelope, to take the time so that people can lower their guard. And that's what has to happen right now. People have to realize that we're not against anyone else. We're just trying to be inclusive. We're trying to be, as I say, equitable. It's not just about equality, it's about equity, to make sure that people see that everyone needs to be at the table.
Well, we hope, we've instilled, the kind of values that they understand that, they're part of the human race and that they have a certain role to play, as far as being human beings, to interact with other people and respect other people.
I march because I feel like I have to, because if I want to have a better life and a better future for my siblings and I, then I have to march in order to show that, I'm serious and that I refuse to be beat into the ground by people who are meant to protect and serve.
We have protested silently and believed like Martin Luther King did at first and all that, but we're beginning to say we've got to speak up and say, hey, it's time for us to look at why people are protesting. Why are they doing this?
We have to uncover those unwritten rules, because I think that many times we are stopped and we are stifled by rules that aren't written down. There may be covenants that are there that need to be exposed, that they're not following anymore, but some people in their minds believe that certain things are true, and they shouldn't be. Redlining is happening, but there are people that can help us to make a change, make a difference. And sometimes it just takes the right person being connected in the right place at the right time to make a difference.
We have got to keep the truth out in front of people. We've got to make sure that the truth remains out front.
But I've been too quiet too long. And I think most of us have been too quiet too long. We don't need to be going through what we're going through. And we shouldn't be rioting. We shouldn't have to tear down things. No, we should know that this country was made on the backs of blacks.
Demand change.
Demand change and be accountable. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or if it's Biden or whoever it is. Demand that they do what's right.